Hi, this is Edward Troxel. In the previous tutorial, we got all the information needed to do the encoding, and now we're going to expand on that to do the actual encode. The information will then be sent over to Media Encoder, which will create the actual file. So let's get started. The changes we're going to make today are all going to center around the render routine that we've created. The first thing we need to do is get the actual extension that will go on the end of our file name. And we can get that from the actual preset that we have chosen. To do that, we have to enable the QE. So we go to app.enable QE. Sometimes typing assist can be a disadvantage because I did not want all that extra stuff. So app.enable QE, and then we're going to get the QE sequence. Var my QE sequence equals QE.project.getActiveSequence. Then let's go ahead and get the regular sequence too, as we'll have to pass that in the encode routine. The variable mySequence equals app.project.ActiveSequence. Now we need to actually get the file extension from the QE sequence. To do that, we'll create a new variable called file extension, and that is going to equal my QE sequence dot get export file extension, and we are going to pass it the preset file name. So my preset dot fs name. Next, we need to check to see if we actually got a valid file extension. So if file extension, then we can process the file, which is going to start with this line, so let's move it up here. Otherwise, put an else in here. We will alert that we could not get the file extension. And we'll put an error message there. Let's go ahead and get rid of these two lines down here since we no longer need them. Now that we know what the file extension is, let's go ahead and add it to the end of the file name. So we're going to do plus and then a dot, which will separate the file name from the file extension, plus and the file extension. So now this will give us the complete full file name, including the file extension. Technically, that's all we need to get this to work. We would just call the encode sequence procedure, but that will return a job ID to us. So let's put var job ID equals app.encoder.encode sequence. Then my sequence is the sequence we are going to be rendering. Then we are going to pass it the full file name. Then we're going to pass it the preset name. And then we are going to tell it what we want it to encode. We actually have 3 different options here, and I'm going to put all 3 options listed, even though we're going to comment out the second 2 for right now. So the first option is app.encoder.encode_entire, and that will let us render the entire sequence out to a new file. Then let's end this with a (1), which will tell it to remove it from the Media Encoder list after the render is complete. Let's copy this line, and I'm going to paste it twice so that we have 3 different versions here. The second version, we're going to change this word entire to work area. This will encode only the work area that has been selected. In many cases, that's still going to be the entire project, but you can change the work area to be whatever size you want. And then in the third one here, we're going to change the word entire to be in_to_out. So if you use I and O to create an in and out area on the timeline, it will encode only from the in to the out. We will look at both of those in Premiere when we move over there. So let's go ahead and comment out these last 2 since we're not going to be using them today. Now let's add one more line down here at the bottom. Since it is passing back a job ID, and since we want to know that the application has actually done something, let's pop another alert on the screen, and we will say job sent to Media Encoder, and then we're going to include the job ID that it returned. So now we'll at least know it got something done. Okay, so far we've gotten the file name. We can make it render now. But what if that file name already exists on the file structure? Do we want to delete it? Do we want to override it? Those are some questions that we need to look at. I'm going to create a new variable up here and call it overwrite existing files and set that to true. If I didn't want to override existing files, I could set that to false. If we wanted to make it a global variable, we could move it outside of this routine so that it could be used everywhere. If we wanted the render to sometimes override existing files and sometimes to not override existing files, we could pass it as a parameter as well. So now that we know the file name down here, we need to check to see if it actually exists and if we can override it. So we need to change the string file name back to a file. So I'm going to create a new variable called check file, and we're going to create a new file variable, and we're going to pass it full file. If we do not want to override it and it exists, then we need to put a warning in here that we can't replace it and get out of this routine. So alert, file already exists, and we'll give it the file name, and then we'll return to exit this routine. Okay, if the file exists and we do want to override it, let's check that next. So if check file.exists, then we need to check to see should we override it. So let's ask. So we'll create a variable, I'll call it override, and then confirm, and we're going to ask them if we want to override it. If they click on OK, we can try to delete it so that it can be overridden. If they don't click OK, then we need to just get out of this routine. If overwrite, let's try to remove it. Otherwise, if they said, no, I do not want to override it, we'll simply return and break out of this routine. Now, let's do one more check. If the file still exists, then we couldn't delete it. And we need to return. Now we've modified the render routine. We've added our new override existing file variable. We've enabled the QE and gotten our two sequences, one in the QE and one in the app. We've gotten the file extension, added it to the file name. We've checked to see if the file name exists and if we can override it. If the file name does not exist, then we will come down and go ahead and send the job to Media Encoder, and then pop up a message saying the job has been sent. So let's see what happens when we open Premiere and give this a test. So let's save this. Right click and drag, choose copy. Yes, we want to replace the files. We want to continue. And now let's open Premiere. Let's start our extension. Select the render preset. If you'll notice, the first time you run Premiere and you try to open another dialog, it actually ends up being behind Premiere. So you have to come down here and select it. It opened, you just couldn't see it because it was behind the Premiere screen. It's actually a bug in Premiere. All subsequent times when you open this window, it'll appear in the front. So let's select our destination. So we type in our file name, my full render test, and we click on render. And then it tells us that the job was sent to Media Encoder and gives us the job number that it used. So at least now we know it was sent. We looked at the three options. The option that we used for this one was to encode the entire sequence, so this one would be about 1 minute and 14 seconds long. The in to out will use the I and the O sections and would only render this little section right here. For the work area, you actually need to turn that on, and we go to the work area bar, and this is the work area bar. We can make this shorter, and we can move it around, and it would only render from this point to this point, depending on whatever size you make this work area. So you could choose easily which section that you wanted to render. I'm going to turn the work area back off. And now let's go over to Media Encoder. So if we look here now in Media Encoder, you will see that the job that we sent is here listed and ready, and it says my full render test, and it's going to in the folder we said. If we choose the export settings, you will see that we are getting the full 1 minute and 14 seconds, and this blue line here shows the entire area that we are getting. So if we click on the start queue, it will do the render. And because we had the (1) at the end, once the render was completed, it was removed from the workspace. And if we go to the Watch Render Test folder on our hard drive, we can see that the new file was created right there. So as you can see, the actual encoding part was fairly easy. The most complicated part was determining whether or not we could use that file name and whether or not we were going to have any other issues along the way. In the next tutorial, we'll continue this and add new options for encoding using the other options we listed. Please sign up at www.jettv.com and subscribe on YouTube to get further notifications on when new videos are presented.